Hello there, good afternoon and welcome to the last Friday of the month edition of Network Africa. Now here's how it works on days like this. Every last Friday of each month we highlight an issue and bring you solutions in our own special kind of way. So we want you to stay tuned as we've got some very special guests joining us in studio shortly to talk with us on the matter we'll be discussing today. But to other news now, the United Nations has given its nod of approval to the European Union based on its plan to triple the size of its naval search mission in the Mediterranean, but said the key test was whether lives were saved and those fleeing the war had a chance of gaining asylum. According to the UNHCR, the EU's assurances mean the operation would have capacity, resources and scope comparable to Italy's Mare Nostrum, which was ended 6 months ago. 4 days after, up to 900 desperate people drowned trying to reach Europe from Libya. EU leaders agreed at an emergency summit just yesterday to restore funding for naval search missions to last year's level. About half of the people who crossed last year were fleeing war or persecution in the African continent as well as the Middle East, thereby deserving refugee status. It urged Europe to provide access to refugee status through other legal channels and to spell out what the new measures will mean for resettling and relocating migrants. Somali and African forces aim to drive al-Shabaab Islamist militants out of one of the last major tracts of territory in southern Somalia, which is what the group still holds and which it uses to launch attacks. Omar Shamak, who is the Prime Minister, says he's pressing Kenya to reopen Somali money transfer firms that are a lifeline to many in Somalia, but whose licenses Nairobi suspended after al-Shabaab raided a North Kenyan university this month, killing 148 people. Al-Shabaab has been driven out of major towns and coastal strongholds since an African Union peacekeeping force and Somali National Army launched an offensive last year. But the group, which wants to topple Somalia's Western-backed government, still holds rural areas such as the Juba Valley corridor that leads to the strategic southern port of Kismayu, where a Kenyan contingent of AU troops is based, and a timeline has not been given for any new operation as things stand at the moment. Now, as we know, Kenya has not changed its mind concerning the expulsion of over 350,000 Somali refugees, which it's currently sheltering at a camp in Dadaab. Now, the decision was prompted by the Garissa University attack, which left 148 people dead. Kenya believes the al-Shabaab militants who carried out the massacre actually hid in the camp. Now, as a result of the decision by Kenya, the head of the United Nations Refugee Agency will be visiting Kenya come early May to discuss plans to repatriate those refugees. Kenya has given the United Nations 3 months to close the Dadaab refugee camp, one of the largest in the world. The UNHCR chief has visited Dadaab several times, including at the height of the 2011 Somali famine when the camp's population swelled to 500,000. Kenya has given the United Nations 3 months, as we told you all earlier on, to repatriate the refugees. Well, the Voice of America's Gabe Jozo, who is in Nairobi, Kenya, actually in the Dadaab camp, joins us now via telephone. Gabe, thank you so much for speaking with us on the program.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Now, I spoke to you earlier on, and you did mention that there were mixed reactions from the refugees. Could you give us more details on that?
Certainly. There seems to be a split of opinion among refugees. Some, particularly those who came more recently, say after the 2011 famine, they are more ready to go back, and they see this order as kind of an opportunity to get assistance from the UN and, the go-ahead from Kenya to go back to Somalia. But other residents who have been here as long as 25 years when the camp first opened are, this is their life, and they don't have a life in Somalia. So for them, the order to go back is quite shocking. They're quite upset about it, and there's a lot of frustration. So it's a mixed bag.
But what are the consequences of expelling these Somali refugees?
Well, there's a lot of the agencies are warning of first of all humanitarian concerns. If refugees go from a place where they have a lot of services, health services, education, etc., and then go to Somalia where the institutions are still very weak, there's a concern that they could really suffer and that they wouldn't have the kind of care that they get in Dadaab. The other concern that a lot of refugees themselves told me was that if they have to pack up and go to Somalia, the young men especially won't have any jobs, they won't have any opportunities, and they worry that they will then go join armed groups and that the security situation will get worse.
But, okay, now speaking of security situation, what's the security situation at the moment in the camp as well as Kenya, generally speaking to some extent?
In the camps, there's often a lot of talk about insecurity here. In fact, the Kenyan government's main justification for trying to close the camps is concerns that al-Shabaab militants were either planning the attacks or either coming from the camps to launch attacks in Kenya. There's never been any confirmed case of that. No refugee has ever been identified directly as an al-Shabaab militant. That doesn't mean that there aren't elements in the camp. So that's sort of the security situation. Also, we travel around with armed guards because there have been a series of small IED attacks. There have been kidnappings in the last 3 years or so. So it's really not great. And across the rest of Kenya, people are still on high alert after the really devastating attack on Garissa University on April 2nd, which you might remember left about 148 people dead, most of them college students.
Okay, finally, Gabe, what are you seeing on ground, in terms of what suggests the government is doing in addition to what we know about the refugees in order to ensure that what we saw happen a couple of weeks ago doesn't repeat itself?
Well, one of the first initiatives that they launched was to try to build a wall along the Somali border up near the town of Mandera. It's not exactly like the Great Wall of China. It's more like a tougher border security zone so that they can keep a closer eye on movements coming across the border. They've also done things like zeroed in on some of the sort of rights groups that have stood up for mostly like Muslim human rights groups along the coast. This is a very controversial move, but they've frozen the accounts of a lot of people they suspect of being involved in terror. Whether that suspicion is justified or not seems we just don't know yet. But these are the kind of actions that they are taking in response after the Garissa attack.
Well, Gabe, it's always been a pleasure. Thank you so much for speaking with us on the program. Please take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Well, that was the Voice of America's Gabe Joslow giving us details from Kenya, Nairobi. Now we'll go to South Africa, where we've got updates for you concerning the xenophobia attacks. Now, a crowd of stick-wielding supporters at a soccer stadium roared their approval as South Africa's Zulu King Goodwill Zwelithini insisted that he was not behind a wave of violence against migrant workers. Now, he had compared a month before he had actually compared migrant workers to head lice. He insists his words had been twisted by the media, saying that if he had really given the order for his legions of followers to attack, then South Africa would actually be in ashes by now. Now, remarks like those with the direct threat of violence have alarmed politicians and activists in South Africa who say they amount to an open challenge to the post-apartheid era and its elected leadership from the traditional head of its biggest ethnic group, which is the 10 million strong Zulu nation. In related news, the Malawi government has confirmed the death of one more Malawian who was stabbed to death in Pietermaritzburg in KwaZulu-Natal, which is South Africa, in South Africa on the 22nd of April 2015, and he was laid to rest yesterday. As a result, Malawians staged protests at shops owned by South Africans demanding their immediate closure. According to the Consumers Association of Malawi boss, that's John Capito, he says the move will help show South Africans that people depend on one another across the globe and also the continent.